Okay, how about it? Take two with Dean Kirk. Back on the countdown of this fancy playlist of August 29th, 1987. How you doing? We're at number two, up five from number seven. Whitesnake, here I go again. David Coverdale delivering some very passionate, powerful vocals straight from the gut. A gut bucket of emotions and soul. Or as the Yardbirds once sang, a heart full of soul. And that's what he did on this record right here. David Coverdale of Whitesnake, he wrote this song along with a guy named Bernie Marsden, one of the group members, or maybe one of the original group members. I didn't get the name of all the group members of Whitesnake, but they wrote this song in about 1981, written in 1981. The song more or less dealt with David Coverdale's disintegration of his first marriage to Julia Burkowski, and they had been married for about 6 or 7 years when their marriage was on the rocks. The song was released in England. They're from England, by the way, Whitesnake, and he was known, David Coverdale was already known more or less by some in the British, among some of the British fans, because he was in Deep Purple. He joined Deep Purple in the 70s, I believe. He was not the original member of Deep Purple, but he was in a very distinguished band for a number of years before he formed Whitesnake. The album was called Saint and Sinners, released in England in 1982. And the original Here I Go Again, it features sort of a gospel-like or gospel-tinted organ or keyboard that was played by John Lord at the time. It was pretty long, over 5 minutes long. And it might have been one of the reasons why it didn't do all that great in England. Just barely made top 40 when the original version of Here I Go Again went to something like number 34 or number 35 in England. Now, the version that came out 5 years later is a little bit shorter. The album version was about 4 minutes, over 4 minutes. And then the single version was a little bit shorter, 3 minutes and 50 seconds. And that's my kind of short right there. Because if I'm a radio programmer, I like it under 4 minutes. Now, if it's a song like Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin or Stairway to Heaven or You Lost That Love and Feeling, then that's one thing. They can go over 5 minutes, but you know, the shorter the record is, a good record, you could pack in more songs, you pack in more commercials and everything. So I'm just that commercially minded, I guess. But anyway, here's the thing about the new version that came out in 1987. It was off the album Whitesnake. It was a self-titled album, Whitesnake. Now, Geffen, the record label, they wanted Whitesnake. Well, they wanted David Coverdale to go back into the studio and do a new version of the song. They wanted a radio-friendly. They want this thing retrofitted for radio. Go back into the studio. Remake this song, polish it up, make it playable on CHR radio. Let's have ourselves a radio hit. Now, the producer of the song, Keith Olsen, he brought in some session musicians to help out on this record. And I got the names. We're going right down into the studio once again when this song was recorded, like I did on that video with Michael Jackson. I was talking about Michael Jackson a while back. But anyway, you probably don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Well, by the way, the session, apparently the group members did not play on the new version of this record when it was recorded. The session musicians that were brought in by the producer Keith Olsen, and I'll talk about Keith Olsen in just a few minutes, included Dan Huff on guitar, Denny Carmassi, bass, I think he was a drummer. I can't read my chicken scratch. Well, Mark Ans, he played on this too. He was I think he might have been a drummer. Carmassi might have been the drummer, and bass player Mark Ans, A-N-D-E-S. Well, there were 3 session musicians that helped out on this record, that played on this record with David Coverdale. David Coverdale was a real trooper on this record. He was not feeling well when he recorded this song. He had a cold, he had something, but he was a pro. He was very professional. He got into the record. He poured his heart out into the song, and the group fed off, and the session musicians, they fed off the energy. They said, man, this guy's getting into it. Let's catch up with him. Let's put some rocket fuel. Let's put some more rocket fuel into this record. Let's send this song into orbit. And they started playing really hard, played really stout, and then played really good on this record. And put out here in the States went... I I didn't get the chart position on. It might have gone to #1. I know it was a real big hit because earlier on in 1987 they had well, it wasn't a big hit, but it was a brilliant record in the Still of the Night or something, spring of '87. Then they came out with a more commercial, Here I Go Again, and then What Is Love, a ballad by them, came out in the fall of 1987. Now, let's talk about the video real quick. The actress was in this video. Her name, Tawny, I believe, I'll just pronounce it as Tawny Kitaen. She very athletic. She obviously in shape, just looked absolutely fantastic. She did some acrobatic stuff, some flips on two Jaguars, two Jags, and those two Jaguars, by the way, one of them was owned by David Coverdale. The other Jaguar, and the video was owned by Marty Callner, the guy who directed the video, and she was David Coverdale's girlfriend at the time. They got married. They married in 1989, and they divorced in 1991. And Kitaen, she was in The Bachelor Party. You might have seen her before you saw her in these videos by Whitesnake. She was in a movie called The Bachelor Party, and that came out in 1984. And I got to give a shout out to Bowling for Soup. Bowling for Soup, I watched, before I did this video, I watched the two videos again. Here I Go Again by Whitesnake. And then Bowling for Soup, they did 1985. It was they did some brilliant records, this alternative band Bowling for Soup, but they never got the recognition, they never got the success, the commercial success they deserved. But they had one really big hit called 1985, which came out, I believe it was 2005. Absolutely genius lyrics all the way. They were giving shout out. They spoofed Motley Crue. They spoofed Robert Palmer. They mentioned Madonna, Springsteen, Waiting on Nirvana, some of the lyrics in the song. And Tawny Kitaen, she was in the video, still looking fabulous in the video, like she hadn't aged at all. And she looked, I was like, wow, man, I'm telling you. Talk about the fountain of youth right there, and as acrobatic as ever. She kind of did her thing on the hood of a car near the end of the video, and then the band gives her a standing ovation at the end of the video. And they mentioned basically the video was about a housewife. It's about a woman who is very nostalgic for the 80s. And she's married, settled down with some guy who's a CPA or something like that. She's bored. She wants to go back to the days of when the mini skirts were made out of snake skin and all that. And I tell you what, if you never heard of Bowling for Soup 1985, you ought to give the song a listen to. I highly suggest you watch the video. It's absolutely genius. And Tawny Kitaen, she was definitely a trooper in this video as well. Now, okay, I want to mention something about Keith Olsen for a minute. Keith Olsen, he produced this album. Well, he produced this record. Keith Olsen was well known back in the 70s and 80s. Keith Olsen, man, he started out in the 60s. He was in a band called The Music Machine, and they had that punk rock classic in the winter of 66 and 67. Yes, man, they rocked out on. It was called, the group was called Music Machine. The song was called Talk Talk, but he later moved into production, even started his production company or something in the early 70s. One of his big successes there, he's worked with Santana, he's worked with Pat Benatar, but one of his big successes, he produced the album Fleetwood Mac by Fleetwood Mac. Now, this was Fleetwood Mac in 1975, but this was when Fleetwood Mac, they added Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham into the mix, into the band. They were sort of a blues, psychedelic rock band. Peter Green, the leader of the band, or one of the leaders of the band until he left in 1970, and they went through some personnel changes. There was Bob Welch was in that band for a while until 1974, and when he left, he was replaced by Lindsey Buckingham, and he brought in Stevie Nicks. All these two added into the band at Keith Olsen's suggestion, and made Fleetwood Mac, at least their first album anyway, took them into more of a commercial, less blues, but more into a commercial direction. And later on, guess what else he produced? Working Class Dog, Rick Springfield, Keith Olsen did. He produced Jesse's Girl. Picked that as a hit. Although there were several hits off that album, did a blazing cover. Rick Springfield did of "I've Done Everything for You," that Sammy Hagar song that he did, but that's another story right there. Let's get back. What we talking about? We went from Whitesnake to Bowling for Soup to Keith Olsen to Talk to Fleetwood Mac. Let's go back to Whitesnake. And I think that's all I got to say about this record. I believe I covered everything that needs to be covered about, that I wanted to cover about this song. And you got to keep in mind, when I talk about these records, it's just a broad brush. It's just impossible to go into every intricate detail, because you're going to blow this, because these videos get blown up to 20 or 30 minutes when you start going into these live stories and everything. All right, here we go. This is Whitesnake. I'll put the video clip on underneath my video when I put this video up. But anyway, it's Whitesnake. Here I go again, riding high at number 2 on this fancy playlist, August 29th, 1987. And I've got to add something else. I completely forgot to mention this. Earlier on in the video, I mentioned that Keith Olsen, he brought in 3 session musicians to help out David Coverdale. They played on the song Here I Go Again, and that the group members didn't necessarily play on the recording of the song. I was partially incorrect on that. Actually, the keyboard player of Whitesnake, his name was Don Airy. He played, well, they replaced the gospel sounding keyboard in the earlier version with more of a strident, maybe a more commercial sounding, that swelling keyboard, that dramatic keyboard that is indicative of the rising, the surging emotions of this record, played by Don Airy. He played that, and he went into and when they went into the recording studio, David Coverdale, along with those other session musicians, guitarist Dan Huff, and I believe Mark Andes, A-N-D-E-S, the bass player, and Denny Carmassi, those 3 session musicians, and Don Airy, a member of the group. Well, I just want to set the record straight that there was one group member, from what I could see, who played on the studio recording of Here I Go Again, the 1987 version of it.
We interrupt this program due to technical difficulties. We shall resume momentarily. Please bear with us.
Wait a minute, just one more thing. I double-checked on Don Airy, the guy who played the keyboards on that record. When I looked at the group lineup of the song, the members of the group who played with Whitesnake over the years, I didn't see his name, so he might have been a session musician or someone who just played the keyboards on that record, Here I Go Again. And I just wanted to kind of set that record straight. So that's it. I guarantee it. That's it this time. Take care.